The gunshot echoed across Presidio, Texas, sending a flock of startled birds into the clear morning sky, as Zoe Nelson stared down the smoking barrel of her father's revolver, tears streaming down her dust-covered cheeks. She'd never intended to fire the weapon, but Reverend Michaels had left her no choice when his unwanted advances crossed from persistent to predatory. "Zoe, what in God's name have you done?" Her father's voice thundered across their modest ranch yard as he burst through the door, his weathered face contorted with anger and shock. It was the summer of 1875, and at 20 years old, Zoe Nelson had just destroyed any chance of a respectable marriage in their small border town, at least according to her father's reckoning. The tall, gangly preacher lay sprawled in the dirt, clutching his bleeding shoulder, his usual pious expression replaced by one of genuine fear. "He tried to force himself on me, Pa, after you and Ma left for town." Zoe's voice trembled, but her grip on the gun remained steady. Her honey-brown hair had come loose from its pins, falling in wild waves around her shoulders. Samuel Nelson glanced between his daughter and the wounded preacher, his loyalties visibly torn. Martha Nelson appeared behind her husband, her usually serene face etched with concern. "Is this true, Reverend?" Samuel demanded, though the question seemed merely a formality. The Nelson family had spent the past month entertaining Reverend Michaels as a potential husband for their headstrong daughter, a match that would elevate their standing in the community. "The girl's hysterical," Reverend Michaels groaned, struggling to his feet while maintaining pressure on his wound. "I was merely offering spiritual guidance when she flew into a rage." "Liar," Zoe spat, taking a step toward him before her mother caught her arm. "He said since we were to be married anyway, I should submit to him now as God intended." Martha Nelson's grip tightened on her daughter's arm. "Samuel, get the doctor for the Reverend." "Zoe, inside. Now." The following hours passed in a blur of heated arguments and hushed conferences. Dr. Freeman bandaged the preacher's shoulder, declaring it a clean wound that would heal with time. The Reverend, remarkably forgiving in the presence of the town's most influential citizens who had gathered at the commotion, expressed his willingness to proceed with the marriage despite the unfortunate misunderstanding. "I will never marry that man," Zoe declared, standing before her parents in their modest parlor after the visitors had departed. "I'd rather die than be his wife." Samuel Nelson paced the worn floorboards, his frustration evident in every heavy footfall. "You've put us in an impossible position, Zoe. The Reverend is willing to overlook this incident." "Overlook?" Zoe's voice rose in disbelief. "He attacked me." "Lower your voice," Martha hissed, glancing nervously toward the windows. "What proof do you have?" "It's your word against his, and he's a man of God." "Your mother's right," Samuel said, his voice softening slightly. "Without witnesses, this accusation could ruin us. The Reverend has connections throughout the territory. He could make life very difficult." Zoe felt the walls closing in around her. "So you'd sacrifice your daughter to preserve your reputation?" Her father's expression hardened. "You'll marry the Reverend next Sunday. I've given my word." That night, Zoe lay awake in her small bedroom, the moonlight casting long shadows across the floor as she contemplated running away. The desert surrounding Presidio was unforgiving, and a woman alone would face dangers perhaps worse than marriage to Reverend Michaels. Still, the thought of submitting to that man made her physically ill. Dawn was just breaking when a soft tapping at her window startled her from a fitful sleep. Cautiously approaching the glass, she was surprised to see Nick Garrett, the ranch hand who worked the neighboring Morgan property. At 25, Nick had a reputation as a skilled horseman and a loyal worker, though Zoe knew him only through occasional encounters at town gatherings and church socials. "Miss Nelson," he whispered urgently when she cracked the window. "I need to speak with you." "Mr. Garrett, this is highly improper," she replied, though she made no move to close the window. "I know what happened yesterday," he said, his blue eyes intense in the early morning light. "I was mending fences on the ridge overlooking your property. I saw everything." Hope surged through Zoe. "You testify to what you saw." Nick shifted uncomfortably. "That's just it. The Reverend's already spreading his version around town. Says you've been unstable, that your parents have been worried about your mental state. He's claiming you invited his affections, then turned violent when he suggested waiting until marriage." Zoe's stomach twisted with dread. "And people believe him. Some do. That's why I came. Your father's determined to see this marriage happen, regardless of the truth." "I know," Zoe admitted, despair evident in her voice. "I've got nowhere to go, no way to support myself." Nick glanced over his shoulder toward the lightening horizon, then leaned closer to the window. "Choose me instead," he said simply. "I'm asking you to marry me, Zoe." Stunned silence fell between them. "You barely know me," she finally managed. "I know enough," Nick replied. "I know you're kind to everyone in town, even old Mrs. Wilkins, who everyone else avoids. I know you're smart. I've seen you reading those medical books at the general store. And I know you deserve better than being forced to marry a man who would hurt you. Why would you do this for me?" Nick's weathered face softened. "Maybe I've admired you from afar longer than is proper to admit. But right now, what matters is getting you away from here. I have a small claim north of here, near the Davis Mountains. It's not much, but it's far enough from Presidio that the Reverend's influence won't reach." The proposition was outrageous, impulsive, and quite possibly her only escape. "My parents would never agree." "We wouldn't ask them," Nick said. "I can have horses ready tonight. We ride north, find a justice of the peace in Fort Davis, and you'll be legally beyond your father's control." The plan was madness, yet as Zoe considered the alternative, a lifetime bound to a predator masquerading as a man of God, it began to seem like her only option. "I need time to think," she whispered. Nick nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Meet me at Cottonwood Creek at midnight if your answer is yes. If not, I'll understand, and I'll still try to help however I can." As he slipped away into the growing light, Zoe closed the window and pressed her forehead against the cool glass. She had less than 18 hours to decide between an arranged marriage to a man she now feared and despised, or fleeing with a near stranger who offered freedom and respect, but no guarantees. Throughout the day, Zoe moved through her chores mechanically, her mind racing with possibilities and consequences. Her mother watched her with suspicious eyes, clearly sensing her daughter's internal turmoil. "The Reverend will be joining us for supper," Martha announced that afternoon as they kneaded bread dough side by side. "He wants to discuss wedding arrangements." Zoe's hand stilled in the soft dough. "So soon after I shot him." "Don't be impertinent," Martha snapped. "We're fortunate he's still willing to have you. A husband of his standing is more than a girl with your temperament deserves." The bitter words stung, but they also crystallized Zoe's resolve. Her own mother believed the preacher over her. There would be no support, no protection from her family. When Reverend Michaels arrived that evening, he played the role of the magnanimous fiancé perfectly, bringing a small bouquet of wildflowers and speaking softly about forgiveness and new beginnings. Only Zoe noticed how his eyes hardened whenever her parents looked away, or how his hand lingered possessively on her shoulder, fingers digging painfully into her flesh when she tried to move away. "I thought we might move the wedding forward," he suggested over dessert. "Perhaps this Sunday rather than next. I see no reason to delay our union, especially given yesterday's unfortunate incident. The sooner Zoe is under proper guidance, the better for her soul." Samuel nodded approvingly. "That sounds sensible. We can make the arrangements tomorrow." "Excellent," the Reverend smiled, reaching across to grasp Zoe's hand on the table. "I look forward to helping Zoe overcome her rebellious nature. With proper discipline, I believe she'll make a suitable minister's wife." The emphasis on discipline sent a chill down Zoe's spine. As she excused herself to clear the dishes, her decision was made. She would meet Nick Garrett at midnight. The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness. Zoe packed a small bundle, a change of clothes, her mother's old medical book that had belonged to her grandmother, and the few coins she'd saved from selling eggs at the market. As the household settled into sleep, she listened for any sign that her parents or the Reverend, who was staying in their guest room, remained awake. At 11:30, she slipped from her bed fully dressed and eased her window open. The drop to the ground was short, and she landed with barely a sound. Clutching her small bundle to her chest, Zoe moved through the shadows of the ranch yard, her heart thundering so loudly she feared it might wake the entire household. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the vast Texas sky. Cottonwood Creek lay just beyond their property line, a 20-minute walk that Zoe covered in nervous haste, jumping at every nocturnal sound. When she reached the agreed meeting place, the tall, distinctive silhouette of Nick Garrett stood waiting beside two saddled horses. Relief flooded through her at the sight. "You came," he said simply, his voice carrying across the quiet night. "I did," Zoe replied, stepping into the moonlight. "I don't see another way out." Nick nodded, no triumph in his expression, only grim determination. "We need to ride hard tonight. Your father will likely discover you missing at dawn, and I wouldn't put it past the Reverend to organize a search party." "Where exactly are we going?" Zoe asked as Nick helped her mount the smaller of the two horses. "My claim is about 30 miles north, but we'll stop first in Fort Davis to find a justice of the peace." He secured her bundle to the saddle. "Once we're legally married, your father will have no right to force you back." The reality of what she was doing suddenly hit Zoe with full force. She was abandoning her family, her home, everything she'd ever known to flee with a man she barely knew. "Mr. Garrett," she began hesitantly. "Nick," he corrected gently. "If we're to be married, you should use my Christian name." "Nick," she amended. "I'm grateful for your help, truly, but I need to know your expectations. What will you want from me as your wife?" Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Nothing you're not willing to give," he answered firmly. "This marriage is to protect you legally. What comes after, if anything, will be your choice. You'll have a safe home for as long as you need it, no strings attached." His sincerity was evident even in the dim light, and something tight in Zoe's chest loosened slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "We should go," Nick said, mounting his own horse. "Stay close and follow my lead." They rode north under the star-filled sky, keeping to the rougher terrain where their tracks would be less obvious. Nick set a steady pace, occasionally glancing back to ensure Zoe was managing the ride. Though she'd grown up around horses, Zoe had rarely ridden for such extended periods, and by the time the first hints of dawn appeared on the horizon, her muscles burned with fatigue. "There's a spot ahead where we can rest," Nick called back to her. "A small spring where we can water the horses and get some sleep before continuing." The spring was nestled in a rocky outcropping that provided natural shelter from both the elements and prying eyes. Nick helped Zoe dismount, his hands strong and steady as her stiff legs nearly buckled beneath her. "You rode well," he commented, leading the horses to water. "Most city folk would be complaining by now." I'm hardly city folk, Zoe replied, stretching her aching back. I've lived on that ranch my whole life. Fair enough, Nick acknowledged with a small smile. Still, it's a hard ride even for experienced travelers. As Nick tended to the horses, Zoe explored their temporary haven. The spring bubbled up from between rocks, creating a small, clear pool before continuing downhill as a narrow stream. Wildflowers grew along its banks, adding splashes of color to the otherwise rugged landscape. "It's beautiful here," she remarked, dipping her hands into the cool water and splashing her dust-covered face. "One of my favorite spots," Nick agreed, joining her after securing the horses. From his saddlebag, he produced jerky, hard biscuits and dried fruit. "Not exactly a feast, but it'll keep us going." They ate in companionable silence as the sky lightened around them. Zoe found herself studying Nick when he wasn't looking, the strong line of his jaw, the way the rising sun brought out copper highlights in his brown hair, the capable hands that handled every task with quiet efficiency. He was handsome in a rugged way, though not in the polished manner of the Reverend or the other eligible men her parents had paraded before her. "You should get some rest," Nick suggested once they'd eaten. "We'll stay here until midday, then continue to Fort Davis. We should arrive by nightfall if we make good time." Zoe nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she truly was. Using her bundle as a pillow, she settled onto a relatively flat section of ground beneath an overhanging rock that provided shade. Despite her intention to remain alert, the physical and emotional strain of the past day soon pulled her into deep sleep. She awakened to the sound of Nick's voice, low and urgent. "Zoe, we need to move. Now." Disoriented, she sat up quickly. The sun was high in the sky. She'd slept longer than intended. "What is it?" "Riders heading this way," Nick explained, already packing their meager supplies. "Could be nothing, but we can't take chances." Fear jolted through Zoe as she scrambled to her feet. "My father can't tell yet. But they're following our general direction." Within minutes, they were mounted and moving again, leaving the sanctuary of the spring behind. Nick led them on a more circuitous route, using the rocky terrain to obscure their trail as much as possible. "If it is your father and the Reverend, where will we go?" Zoe asked, anxiety making her voice tight. "Fort Davis is the obvious destination." Nick nodded grimly. "I know a place, a small trading post run by a friend. We can lay low there for a day or two if necessary, then find another justice of the peace further north." They rode hard through the afternoon, the Texas sun beating down mercilessly. Zoe's earlier fatigue returned with a vengeance, but she kept pace with Nick without complaint. By late afternoon, with no further sign of pursuit, they began to hope they had evaded detection. As the sun dipped toward the western horizon, the outline of Fort Davis appeared in the distance. The small military outpost and adjoining town represented safety and legitimacy for their plan, and Zoe felt a surge of relief at the sight. "We made it," she breathed. Nick's expression remained cautious. "Let's not celebrate yet. We'll find lodging first, then locate the justice in the morning." Fort Davis was larger than Presidio, with a bustling main street lined with businesses catering to both the military personnel stationed at the fort and travelers passing through. Nick led them to a modest hotel on the edge of town, far enough from the main thoroughfare to avoid casual observation. "Wait here," he instructed, dismounting outside the establishment. "I'll secure us rooms." "Rooms?" Zoe questioned. "Plural." Nick's face softened. "Of course. As I said, nothing happens that you don't want, not until we're properly married, and even then only when you're ready." His consideration touched her deeply. The Reverend would never have shown such respect for her boundaries. Nick returned moments later. All set. They have 2 adjoining rooms available. I've arranged for bathwater to be sent up as well. Thought you might appreciate getting cleaned up after the ride. The hotel was simple but clean, and the promised bathwater arrived promptly. For the first time since fleeing Presidio, Zoe allowed herself to truly relax as she sank into the warm water in the privacy of her room. The events of the past 2 days felt surreal. Had she really shot a man, fled her home, and agreed to marry someone she barely knew? Yet as she considered her situation, Zoe realized she felt safer with Nick Garrett than she had in her own home after the Reverend's attack. There was something fundamentally decent about the cowboy, a quiet integrity that couldn't be feigned. After bathing and changing into her spare dress, Zoe heard a soft knock at the door connecting their rooms. "Are you decent?" Nick called. "I thought we might discuss our plans over supper. The hotel has a small dining room downstairs." Opening the door, Zoe found Nick similarly refreshed, his hair still damp from his own bath, wearing a clean shirt that strained slightly across his broad shoulders. "You look better," he commented with a small smile. "Less like you've been dragged behind a horse." "Thank you for that flattering observation," Zoe replied, surprised to find herself smiling back. "I imagine I was quite a sight." "A beautiful sight, regardless," Nick said, then immediately looked embarrassed by his own words. "Forgive me, that was forward." "It was kind," Zoe corrected him. "And appreciated after everything that's happened." The hotel's dining room was sparsely populated, with only a few other guests scattered at tables around the small space. They chose a corner table that afforded some privacy, while allowing Nick to keep watch on the entrance, a precaution that reminded Zoe they weren't yet safe. Over a simple meal of beef stew and cornbread, they discussed the next steps in their plan. "The justice of the peace lives just off the main street," Nick explained. "We can see him first thing tomorrow morning. Once the marriage is legal, we can decide whether to continue directly to my claim or remain here another day to rest." Zoe nodded, pushing her stew around her bowl. "And what will happen when we reach your claim? What sort of place is it?" "Modest," Nick admitted frankly. "A small cabin with 2 rooms, a decent-sized barn, and about 80 acres of land. Some of it suitable for crops, the rest good grazing land for cattle. I've been working at the Morgan Ranch to earn money for more stock." "It sounds peaceful," Zoe said, surprising herself with her sincerity. After the turmoil of recent days, a simple life away from society's judgmental eyes held strong appeal. "It can be," Nick agreed. "It can also be hard and lonely. I won't lie to you about that." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the hotel entrance. Both turned to see a group of men entering the dining room, dust-covered and travel-worn. Zoe's blood ran cold as she recognized her father's distinctive gait among them, and beside him, the tall, angular figure of Reverend Michaels. "Nick," she whispered urgently, ducking her head. "I see them," he replied, his voice equally low. "Don't move yet, let me think." But it was too late. Samuel Nelson's eyes swept the room and locked onto his daughter. His weather-beaten face darkened with fury as he stalked toward their table, the Reverend and 2 other men Zoe recognized from Presidio following closely behind. "There you are, you ungrateful child," Samuel growled, looming over their table. "Do you have any idea what you've put your mother through? Running off like a common tramp." Nick rose slowly to his feet, positioning himself slightly between Zoe and the angry men. "Mr. Nelson, I understand you're upset, but I'd ask you to watch your tone when speaking to the lady." "Lady?" Reverend Michaels interjected, his voice dripping with contempt. "Is that what you call a woman who abandons her family to flee with another man? I call that something else entirely." "You have no right to judge her," Nick responded, his calm demeanor belied by the tension in his shoulders. "Not after what you tried to do." "Lies and slander," the Reverend declared loudly, addressing the now attentive dining room as much as their immediate group. "This man has coerced an emotionally fragile young woman away from her loving family and church community." "That's not true," Zoe protested, finding her voice at last. "I chose to leave because my own family wouldn't protect me from this man's unwanted advances." Samuel's face flushed with anger. "Enough! You're coming home with us now, Zoe. This foolishness ends tonight." "She's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go," Nick stated firmly. "We've come to Fort Davis to be married, and after tomorrow you'll have no legal authority over her." "Married?" Samuel sputtered incredulously. "To a ranch hand with no prospects and no standing. I forbid it." "It's not your decision to make," Zoe replied, standing to join Nick. "I'm of age, and I choose Nick Garrett over the man who attacked me and the family who refused to believe me." The Reverend stepped forward, his face a mask of righteous indignation. "This is absurd. Samuel, take your daughter home where she belongs. As for this man," he turned his cold gaze on Nick, "I'll see charges brought against him for abduction." "That would be difficult," came a new voice from the entrance of the dining room. A tall man in a marshal's uniform surveyed the scene with evident interest. "Considering the young lady appears to be here of her own free will." "Marshal Harris," Reverend Michaels acknowledged with forced politeness. "This is a family matter. This young woman is promised in marriage to me, and this man has interfered with that arrangement." Marshal Harris raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" He turned to Zoe. "Miss, are you being held against your will?" "No, sir," Zoe answered clearly. "I left Presidio voluntarily with Mr. Garrett after Reverend Michaels made improper advances toward me and my family refused to protect me. She shot me." The Reverend exclaimed, pointing to his bandaged shoulder visible beneath his coat. "The girl is unstable, Marshal." "I shot him because he tried to force himself on me," Zoe countered, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Mr. Garrett witnessed the attack from the neighboring property." The Marshal's expression remained neutral as he processed this information. "Serious allegations on both sides. Mr. Garrett, you claim to have witnessed this alleged attack." "Yes, sir," Nick confirmed. "I was mending fence on the ridge overlooking the Nelson property when I saw the Reverend grab Miss Nelson and attempt to force himself on her, despite her clear refusal. She fired the gun in self-defense after he wouldn't release her." "Convenient that no one else saw this supposed attack," the Reverend sneered. "Marshal," Samuel interjected, "my daughter is confused and impressionable. The Reverend has agreed to overlook this incident and proceed with the marriage as planned. We just want to take her home." Marshal Harris studied Zoe carefully. "Miss, how old are you?" 20 years old, sir." "Then legally, you're free to make your own choice," the Marshal stated plainly. "If you're here willingly with Mr. Garrett, your father has no legal right to force you to return home." "But she's promised to me," Reverend Michaels protested, his composure slipping. "Her father gave his word." "Unless there's a legally binding contract, which I doubt, a verbal agreement between her father and you doesn't override the lady's consent," the Marshal explained with the weariness of someone who dealt with similar situations before. "Now, I suggest we all calm down before I have to start arresting people for disturbing the peace." Samuel Nelson's face contorted with rage. "This isn't over," he hissed at Zoe. "You've disgraced our family name." "I'm sorry you feel that way, Pa," Zoe replied, genuine sadness in her voice. "But I won't sacrifice my life to preserve appearances." "Come, Samuel," the Reverend urged, tugging at his companion's arm. "We'll resolve this through proper legal channels." As the group retreated from the dining room, Marshal Harris approached Zoe and Nick's table. "I'd suggest you two conclude your business in Fort Davis quickly," he advised quietly. "Men like the Reverend have influence, even outside their immediate community." "We plan to see the justice of the peace first thing tomorrow," Nick explained. The marshal nodded. "Justice Parker opens his office at 8 o'clock. I'd be there on the dot if I were you." He tipped his hat to Zoe. "Madam." After the marshal departed, Zoe sank back into her chair, the confrontation leaving her shaking with delayed reaction. "They found us so quickly." "They must have ridden through the night," Nick observed, his own face grim. "And they won't give up easily." "What if they try to stop the wedding tomorrow?" "They can try," Nick replied, determination evident in his voice. "But the marshal seems to be on our side, and once we're legally married, they'll have no grounds to interfere." They finished their meal in tense silence before returning to their rooms. At the connecting door, Nick paused. "Try to get some rest," he advised. "I'll keep watch for a while in case they try anything tonight." Zoe reached out impulsively, catching his hand. "Thank you, Nick, for everything. I know this isn't what you planned when you offered to help me." His fingers tightened gently around hers. "Actually, it's exactly what I planned. Getting you safely away from that man and giving you a chance at a life where you make your own choices." The simple sincerity of his words touched something deep within Zoe. On impulse, she rose on tiptoe and pressed a light kiss to his cheek. "Good night, Nick." A faint blush colored his tanned face. "Good night, Zoe." Despite Nick's advice, sleep proved elusive. Zoe lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the muted sounds of the hotel and the occasional footsteps passing in the hallway. Every noise made her tense, expecting her father or the Reverend to attempt forcing their way into her room. At some point, exhaustion finally claimed her, and she slept fitfully until the first gray light of dawn filtered through the thin curtains. A soft knock at the connecting door roused her fully. "Zoe, are you awake?" Nick called softly. "Yes," she replied, quickly rising and pulling a shawl around her shoulders over her nightdress before opening the door. Nick stood fully dressed, his expression serious. "I've been keeping watch. Your father and the Reverend are in the hotel lobby. I think they're planning to intercept us on the way to the justice's office." "What do we do?" "There's a back stairway. We can use it to avoid them, but we need to move quickly." Zoe nodded. "Give me 5 minutes to dress." True to her word, Zoe was ready in record time, her hair hastily pinned up and her belongings packed in her small bundle. Nick led the way down the narrow back stairs that the hotel staff used for service purposes, and they emerged into an alley behind the building. "The justice's office is 3 blocks north," Nick explained in a hushed voice as they hurried through the quiet morning streets. "With luck, we'll be there when he opens and completed before your father realizes we've slipped past them." Fort Davis was just beginning to stir as they made their way toward the justice's office, a small building wedged between a land office and a dressmaker's shop. To their relief, a light was already visible through the window, and when Nick knocked on the door, an elderly man with spectacles perched on his nose answered promptly. "Justice Parker?" Nick inquired. "That's right," the man confirmed, studying them curiously. "You're early birds, I must say." "We'd like to be married, sir," Nick explained, glancing nervously up and down the street. "As soon as possible." The justice's bushy eyebrows rose. "In a mighty hurry, are we? Any particular reason?" Zoe stepped forward. "My father is trying to force me to marry another man against my will. We've come to Fort Davis to be legally married before he can interfere." Justice Parker's expression sobered. "I see. Well, come in then. Marshal Harris mentioned you might be stopping by." The justice's office was small but tidy, with a desk, several chairs, and shelves lined with law books. He gestured for them to sit while he retrieved a leather-bound register from his desk. "You have witnesses?" he inquired, dipping his pen in an inkwell. Nick's face fell. "We hadn't thought of that." Problematic," Justice Parker mused. "The law requires 2 witnesses." Before either could respond, the office door opened and Marshal Harris entered, removing his hat. "Morning, Justice. Thought you might need a witness about now." Relief flooded through Zoe. "Marshal, thank you. Still need one more," Justice Parker pointed out. "My wife will be along shortly," the marshal replied with a small smile. "I sent word when I saw these 2 sneaking through the alley this morning." True to his word, a pleasant-faced woman in her 40s arrived minutes later, introducing herself as Mrs. Harris. With the witness requirement satisfied, Justice Parker began the simple ceremony, his voice carrying the weight of official authority as he led Nick and Zoe through their vows. When the moment came to exchange rings, Nick produced a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. "I've carried this since she passed," he explained quietly to Zoe. "I'd be honored if you'd wear it." The gesture nearly brought tears to Zoe's eyes. "I'd be honored to accept it." As Justice Parker pronounced them husband and wife, a commotion outside the office grew steadily louder. The door burst open just as the justice was signing the marriage certificate, revealing Samuel Nelson and Reverend Michaels. "Stop this at once," Samuel demanded, his face flushed with exertion. "You're too late, Mr. Nelson," Justice Parker stated calmly, blotting the ink on the certificate. "The ceremony is complete and legally binding. May I present Mr. and Mrs. Nicholas Garrett?" The Reverend's face contorted with fury. "This is outrageous. The girl was promised to me." "The woman," Marshal Harris emphasized, stepping forward, "has made her choice and it's legally recognized." "I suggest you both accept that fact." Samuel Nelson looked at his daughter with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You've made your choice then. This nobody over your family." Zoe's heart ached at the rejection in her father's voice, but she stood firm. "I chose a good man who respects me over a future of fear and submission. I'm sorry that disappoints you, Pa." "You're no daughter of mine," Samuel declared coldly. "Don't ever try to come home." The brutal finality of his words struck Zoe like a physical blow. Despite everything, she hadn't truly believed her father would disown her completely. Nick's arm came around her shoulders, steady and supportive. "Mrs. Garrett and I will be leaving Fort Davis today," he informed the group. "I trust there will be no further attempts to interfere with our marriage." "The law is clear," Justice Parker affirmed, handing the marriage certificate to Zoe. "This union is legal and binding." Reverend Michaels looked as though he might argue further, but Marshal Harris moved subtly to block his path. "Gentlemen, I believe your business in Fort Davis is concluded." With a final venomous glare, the Reverend turned on his heel and stalked from the office. Samuel Nelson lingered a moment longer, his eyes on his daughter. "Your mother will be heartbroken," he said, his voice quieter now. "Tell her I love her," Zoe replied, fighting back tears. "And that I hope someday she'll understand why I had to leave." Samuel gave a curt nod before following the Reverend, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Justice Parker cleared his throat. "Well, that was more excitement than we usually see at a wedding ceremony." "Congratulations to you both, all the same." Zoe managed a weak smile. "Thank you, Justice Parker, and thank you, Marshal and Mrs. Harris, for your help." "Happy to assist," the Marshal replied. "Now I'd suggest you two get on your way. Those men might still try to make trouble, especially the Reverend." Nick nodded in agreement. "We'll leave immediately. I can't thank you enough for your intervention." They departed the justice's office with their precious marriage certificate securely tucked away, heading directly to the livery stable where their horses had been kept overnight. As Nick settled their bill with the stableman, Zoe found herself staring at the gold band on her finger, still processing the enormous change in her circumstances. Yesterday, she had been Zoe Nelson, fleeing an unwanted marriage. Today, she was Zoe Garrett, legally wed to a man she had known for mere days. "Are you all right?" Nick asked gently as he helped her mount her horse. "It's all happening so fast," she admitted. "I don't regret our marriage," she hastened to add, seeing concern cross his face. "It's just overwhelming." "I understand," Nick replied, swinging up onto his own mount. "For what it's worth, I meant every word of my vows. I'll do everything in my power to give you a good life, Zoe." His earnestness touched her deeply. "I believe you will." They rode north out of Fort Davis, keeping a steady pace as the town receded behind them. Nick explained that his claim was another day's ride, nestled in a small valley with reliable water and good protection from the elements. "It's not much to look at yet," he admitted as they traveled. "But it has potential. Good soil, plenty of water from the creek that runs through the property. I've started a small herd, just 10 head of cattle so far, but quality stock." "It sounds wonderful," Zoe replied sincerely. After the events of the past days, the idea of a quiet, remote homestead held tremendous appeal. They rode through the day, stopping occasionally to rest the horses and eat from the provisions Nick had purchased in Fort Davis. As the terrain grew more rugged, the beauty of the landscape began to work its magic on Zoe's troubled spirit. Vast stretches of open country spread before them, dotted with mesquite and occasional stands of oak where the land dipped into natural watersheds. "How did you come to have this land?" Zoe asked during one of their rest stops, curious about the man who was now her husband. Nick's expression grew reflective. "My father staked the claim after the war. He served with the Union cavalry and came west afterward looking for a fresh start. Built the cabin, started acquiring cattle. I was just a boy then." "And your mother?" "Died of fever when I was 14, Nick replied, a shadow crossing his face. "Pa struggled after that, started drinking heavy. By the time he passed 3 years ago, the herd was down to almost nothing and the place had fallen into disrepair." "I'm sorry," Zoe said softly. "That must have been difficult," Nick nodded. "It was. Took work at the Morgan Ranch to earn money to rebuild. Mr. Morgan's been good to me, let me work my own place on the side and helped me acquire new breeding stock. He sounds like a kind employer." "He is. Sent word last week that he'd be holding a job for me whenever I wanted to return." A small smile touched Nick's lips, though I hadn't planned on returning with a wife. Zoe felt a blush warm her cheeks. "I've disrupted your plans entirely, haven't I?" "In the best possible way," Nick assured her. "Truth is, I've been working toward making the place suitable for a family. Just didn't expect it to happen quite so suddenly." As evening approached, they made camp in a protected hollow. Nick efficiently built a small fire and prepared a simple meal from their provisions. Watching him move with quiet confidence around the camp, Zoe felt a growing appreciation for his capability and thoughtfulness. After they had eaten, an awkward silence fell between them as both contemplated the sleeping arrangements. Though legally married, they remained virtual strangers in many ways. "I'll sleep over there," Nick finally said, indicating a spot several yards from where he'd laid out a blanket for Zoe near the fire. "You should take the better spot, it's more protected from the wind." "Thank you," Zoe replied, touched by his continued respect for her boundaries. "Nick, I know this isn't a conventional marriage, but I want you to know I'm grateful, not just for rescuing me, but for how you've treated me throughout this ordeal." Nick's expression softened in the firelight. "You deserve nothing less, Zoe. I meant what I said before. This marriage is on your terms. I'm content to be your protector and friend for as long as you need." That night, as Zoe lay wrapped in her blanket looking up at the vast canopy of stars, she reflected on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. She had lost her family but gained freedom and safety, and perhaps, in time, something more with the quiet, honorable man sleeping nearby. They reached Nick's homestead the following afternoon. As they crested a small rise, the property came into view below a sturdy log cabin with a stone chimney, a well-built barn, and beyond them, fenced pastures where a small herd of cattle grazed alongside several horses. "It's beautiful," Zoe breathed, taking in the peaceful scene. "It's home," Nick replied simply, a note of pride in his voice. As they rode into the yard, a large dog came bounding from the direction of the barn, barking excitedly. "That's Rusty," Nick explained with a grin. "He watches the place when I'm gone. Old Pete Miller from the next valley checks on the stock and feeds him." The dog circled their horses enthusiastically as they dismounted, eventually settling enough to allow Nick to pat his head. "Rusty, meet Zoe. She's home to stay." Those simple words, "home to stay," created a lump in Zoe's throat. After the turmoil and rejection of recent days, the concept of a permanent home where she was wanted and welcomed was powerfully moving. Nick showed her around the cabin, first a main room with a stone fireplace that served as kitchen and living area, and two smaller rooms off to one side. One was clearly Nick's bedroom, with a handmade bed frame supporting a straw tick mattress, a chest for clothing, and few personal items. The other room contained only a workbench and tools. "I use this as a workshop now," Nick explained, "but it was meant to be a second bedroom. We can move my things in here temporarily until I can build proper furniture for you." "I couldn't put you out of your own room," Zoe protested. "You're not putting me out," Nick insisted. "I've slept under the stars plenty of times. The workshop floor will be a luxury by comparison." Despite her continued objections, Nick was firm on the matter. By evening, he had cleared his personal belongings from the bedroom and made up the bed with fresh linens he produced from a trunk. "They were my mother's," he explained somewhat sheepishly. "I've kept them packed away for when they might be needed." The care with which he had preserved these items from his mother touched Zoe deeply. It spoke to the kind of man he was, one who valued family and tradition, who planned and prepared for a future beyond his solitary existence. That first evening in their new home, Nick taught Zoe the basics of the household, where he kept provisions, how to work the pump for water, which local plants could be used for medicine or seasoning. She absorbed it all eagerly, determined to be a useful partner in this unexpected arrangement. After a simple supper, they sat before the fireplace, the crackling flames providing both warmth and light as night settled over the homestead. Rusty lay at their feet, occasionally sighing contentedly in his sleep. "Tomorrow I'll show you the rest of the property," Nick said, his voice soft in the quiet room. "There's a good garden plot behind the cabin. Previous years I've just grown basics: potatoes, beans, corn, but there's room for more if you've a mind for gardening." "I'd like that," Zoe replied, realizing she meant it. "My mother taught me about growing herbs and vegetables. It would be nice to have a proper garden." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the fire's gentle crackling. For the first time since leaving Presidio, Zoe felt truly at peace, the constant fear and anxiety of recent days finally beginning to recede. "Nick," she said after a while, "I want to be a real wife to you." He looked up sharply, surprise evident in his expression. "Zoe, there's no rush." "As I said, I expect nothing, I know," she interrupted gently. "And that's precisely why I'm saying this. You've been nothing but honorable and kind. You've given me a home and protection when I had nowhere else to turn. I want our marriage to be real in all ways in time." Nick's face softened. "In time is the important part. We hardly know each other yet. I want you to be certain." "I'm certain I made the right choice in coming with you," Zoe replied. "The rest will follow naturally, I think. I just wanted you to know that I don't view this as merely an arrangement of convenience. I want to build a true marriage, a true partnership." The smile that spread across Nick's face was like sunrise breaking over the horizon. "I want that too, Zoe, more than I can say." The days that followed settled into a comfortable rhythm. Nick showed Zoe every aspect of the homestead, from the creek that provided their water to the stands of oak that supplied their firewood. He introduced her to each of his small herd of cattle, pointing out with particular pride a handsome bull he'd purchased with his savings from the Morgan Ranch. "He's the future of our herd," Nick explained. "Good bloodlines, strong constitution. In a few years, we could have 30 head or more from his offspring." Zoe found herself genuinely interested in learning about the ranch operations. She had grown up on her father's property, of course, but had never been included in the practical aspects of running it. Samuel Nelson had viewed such matters as men's business, while his daughter was expected to focus on domestic skills that would make her a suitable wife. Nick, by contrast, answered all her questions patiently and included her in his daily decisions. When she expressed interest in learning to ride better, he spent an afternoon helping her become comfortable on Penny, the gentle mare that had carried her from Presidio. "You've got a natural seat," he commented as she successfully guided the horse through a series of turns. "Just need practice and confidence." "My father never thought it proper for ladies to ride astride," Zoe admitted. "I had to use a side saddle, which limited what I could do." Nick's expression was thoughtful. "Your father seems to have had many ideas about what's proper for ladies. Were you happy there before all this happened?" The question gave Zoe pause. "I never really considered whether I was happy," she answered honestly. "It was simply my life. But looking back now, I see how confined it was. My parents had my future mapped out from birth, marriage to a suitable man, a life dedicated to being a proper wife and mother. And that's not what you wanted. Parts of it, perhaps," Zoe said slowly. "I do want a family someday. But I also want more than that. I used to sneak my grandmother's medical books from my mother's trunk and read them by candlelight after everyone was asleep. I dreamed of healing people, of doing something meaningful with my life." Nick nodded, understanding. "My mother was like that, always helping neighbors with sickness or birthing, had quite a knowledge of herbs and remedies." "Really?" Zoe's interest was immediately piqued. "Did she leave any notes or books?" "As a matter of fact, she did," Nick replied with a smile. "There's a journal of hers in the trunk with the linens. I should have shown it to you. She recorded all her remedies and observations over the years." That evening, Nick produced the journal, a leather-bound book filled with neat handwriting documenting treatments for everything from fever to broken bones. Zoe pored over it reverently, recognizing some remedies from her grandmother's teachings and discovering many new ones. "This is a treasure," she breathed. "Your mother was clearly very knowledgeable. She would have liked you," Nick said quietly. "She always wished for a daughter to pass her knowledge to." The simple statement created a warm glow in Zoe's chest. "I would be honored to continue her work. People in these remote areas need medical help." Nick's expression grew serious. "It can be dangerous. Some folks are suspicious of women healers." "I'm not afraid of that," Zoe replied firmly. "If I've learned anything these past days, it's that I'm stronger than I thought." Nick reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "That you are, Zoe Garrett, that you are." The casual touch sent a pleasant warmth through Zoe. Over the past week, she had become increasingly aware of Nick as a man, his physical strength as he worked around the ranch, the genuine kindness in his eyes when he spoke to her, the respectful way he maintained his distance despite their marriage. That night, after Nick had retired to his makeshift bed in the workshop, Zoe lay awake in the bedroom that was now hers, contemplating the strange path that had led her here and the man who had become her unlikely husband. There was no denying her growing attraction to him, both for his physical presence and for the quality of his character. The following day brought unexpected visitors. Zoe was tending the small garden she had begun establishing behind the cabin when the sound of approaching horses drew her attention. Rising from her knees and wiping her soil-covered hands on her apron, she shaded her eyes against the midday sun to see two riders approaching from the direction of the main road. Nick emerged from the barn where he'd been repairing tack, moving to stand protectively beside her as the visitors drew closer. "It's all right," he assured her, recognizing the riders. "That's Mr. Morgan and his son William." Relief flooded through Zoe. After the confrontation with her father and the Reverend in Fort Davis, she had been anxious about potential visitors. Thomas Morgan was a robust man in his 50s, with a neatly trimmed gray beard and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. His son William appeared to be in his early 20s, with his father's sturdy build but darker coloring. "Nick, good to find you home," Thomas called as they dismounted in the yard. "We were beginning to wonder if you'd abandoned us for good." "Not at all, Mr. Morgan," Nick replied, stepping forward to shake the older man's hand. "Just had some unexpected business to attend to." He glanced back at Zoe with a smile. "Allow me to introduce my wife, Zoe. We were married last week in Fort Davis." Both Morgan's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Wife?" Thomas repeated, looking from Nick to Zoe and back again. "Well, last time we spoke you hadn't mentioned courting anyone." "It happened rather suddenly," Nick admitted with a slight flush. "Zoe, this is Thomas Morgan, my employer and friend, and his son William." "Pleased to meet you both," Zoe greeted them, suddenly conscious of her dirt-stained apron and wind-blown hair. "The pleasure is ours, Mrs. Garrett," Thomas replied, removing his hat and bowing slightly. "This explains Nick's extended absence. We thought perhaps he'd fallen ill." "Please, come inside," Zoe invited, falling naturally into the role of hostess. "I can prepare some coffee and we have fresh bread." As the men settled around the table, Zoe busied herself with the coffee pot, listening as Nick explained his absence to his employer, providing a simplified version of events that omitted the more dramatic elements, while making it clear that the marriage had been necessary to protect Zoe from an unwanted arrangement. Thomas Morgan listened thoughtfully, occasionally glancing at Zoe with sympathetic understanding. When Nick finished his explanation, the older man nodded slowly. "You did the honorable thing, Nick. Not many would have stepped up that way." He turned to Zoe with a gentle smile. "You found yourself a good man, Mrs. Garrett. One of the best." "I know," Zoe replied softly, placing a hand on Nick's shoulder as she set a cup of coffee before him. The casual gesture of affection came naturally, surprising both of them. The Morgans' visit extended through the afternoon. Thomas had come partly to check on Nick and partly to offer him continued work at the main ranch. "We understand you've got your own place to run now, especially with a wife to consider," Thomas explained. "But we could still use your help 3 days a week if you're willing." Good hands are hard to find in these parts. The offer was generous, providing steady income while allowing Nick sufficient time to work his own property. After a quick exchange of glances with Zoe, who nodded her encouragement, Nick accepted gratefully. "We'd be pleased if you both would join us for Sunday dinner at the main house this weekend," Thomas added as they prepared to depart. "My wife would love to meet the woman who finally captured Nick's heart." After the Morgans had ridden away, Nick turned to Zoe with a slightly sheepish expression. "I hope you don't mind that I accepted the dinner invitation. The Morgans have been like family to me since my father passed." "Of course I don't mind," Zoe assured him. "They seem like wonderful people, and the work arrangement sounds perfect steady income while you build up the ranch." "While we build up the ranch," Nick corrected gently. "This is our place now, Zoe, our future." The simple statement, delivered with such quiet certainty, filled Zoe with warmth. For the first time, she truly felt like this homestead was becoming her home and this man her genuine partner. That evening, after supper was cleared away, Zoe made a decision. Instead of retiring to her bedroom as had become their custom, she settled beside Nick on the bench before the fireplace, close enough that their shoulders touched. "The Morgans seem to think highly of you," she observed. Nick nodded, his profile illuminated by the dancing firelight. "They took me under their wing after my father died. Mr. Morgan taught me most of what I know about cattle ranching." "They clearly consider you family," Zoe said softly. "It's nice to know you weren't completely alone." "I was lucky to have their support," Nick agreed. "Still, it's been a solitary existence out here most of the time, having you here." He paused, seeming to search for words. "It makes this place feel like a real home for the first time." Emboldened by his words, Zoe reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. "I've been thinking, Nick, about us, about our marriage." Nick turned to face her, his expression open but cautious. "What about it?" "I think it's time we stopped pretending this is just an arrangement of convenience." Her heart pounded as she continued, "I've grown to care for you these past days, more than I expected to." The hope that dawned in Nick's eyes gave her courage to continue. "You've been so patient, so respectful. But I don't want you sleeping on the workshop floor anymore. I want you beside me as my husband in truth." For a moment, Nick seemed unable to speak. When he finally found his voice, it was husky with emotion. "Are you certain, Zoe? I meant what I said about waiting until you're ready." "I'm certain," she replied, surprising herself with how completely she meant it. "I chose you, Nick, not just as an escape from the Reverend, but as the man I want to build a life with." With infinite tenderness, Nick raised his free hand to her cheek. "I've been falling in love with you since the moment you stood up to your father in that hotel dining room," he admitted. "Your courage, your kindness, your determination. I've never known anyone like you." The simple declaration melted something inside Zoe. Leaning forward, she pressed her lips to his in their first real kiss. It was gentle at first, exploratory, but quickly deepened as weeks of restrained emotion found release. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Nick rested his forehead against hers. "I want to court you properly," he murmured. "Even though we're already married, you deserve to be wooed, not just wed out of necessity." Zoe smiled, touched by his consideration. "I'd like that," she admitted, "but I also want to be a real wife to you starting tonight." Later, as moonlight filtered through the cabin's small window, casting silver patterns across the bed they now shared, Zoe marveled at how completely her life had transformed in less than 2 weeks. From the desperate young woman fleeing an unwanted marriage, she had become the cherished wife of a man whose gentle strength and unwavering honor had captured her heart. Nick's arms encircled her as they lay together in the quiet darkness, his breathing deep, and even as he drifted toward sleep. In that moment of peaceful contentment, Zoe knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged. The Sunday dinner at the Morgan Ranch introduced Zoe to an extended community for the first time since her arrival in the area. Rebecca Morgan, Thomas's wife, was a warm, practical woman who immediately took Zoe under her wing, introducing her to several neighboring ranchers' wives who had also been invited. "We're so pleased Nick has finally found someone," Rebecca confided as they prepared dessert in the spacious kitchen. "We've worried about him being so isolated out there." "It's been an adjustment," Zoe admitted, "but a welcome one. Nick has been wonderful. Rebecca smiled knowingly. He's always been a good man, just needed the right woman to bring him out of his shell. She hesitated, then added more quietly, Thomas mentioned there was some trouble with your family. I hope you know you have friends here if you need support. The simple offer of friendship brought unexpected tears to Zoe's eyes. Thank you. That means more than I can say. Through the kitchen window, Zoe could see Nick in the yard, deep in conversation with Thomas and several other men. He looked relaxed and at ease, occasionally laughing at something someone said. Watching him, Zoe felt a surge of pride and affection. You love him, Rebecca observed softly, following Zoe's gaze. I do, Zoe replied, the realization solidifying as she spoke the words aloud. It happened so quickly, but yes, I love him. The best ones often do happen that way, Rebecca said with a knowing smile. Thomas and I knew within a week of meeting that we were meant for each other. When it's right, you just know. That evening, as they rode home under a canopy of stars, Zoe shared Rebecca's comments with Nick. She said when it's right, you just know, she concluded, glancing sideways at him in the moonlight. I think she's right. Nick reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. I knew the moment you opened that window and spoke to me, he admitted. I just didn't expect you'd ever feel the same. Well, I do, Zoe replied simply. I love you, Nick Garrett. His smile in the moonlight was worth every hardship she'd endured to reach this point. And I love you, Zoe Garrett, more than I have words to express. In the weeks that followed, their marriage deepened in every sense. Nick divided his time between working at the Morgan Ranch and improving their own property, while Zoe established a thriving garden and began putting her medical knowledge to use. Word spread quickly about the new healer at the Garrett homestead, and soon neighbors from miles around were stopping by with everything from minor ailments to more serious conditions. Nick built additional shelves in the cabin to hold the growing collection of herbs and remedies Zoe prepared, combining her grandmother's teachings with the knowledge from his mother's journal. He watched with pride as she gained confidence in her abilities, treating children's fevers, setting broken bones, and even assisting with a difficult birth at a neighboring homestead. Their own relationship blossomed alongside these professional developments. Each day brought new discoveries about one another. Nick's unexpected talent for whittling delicate wooden figures, Zoe's beautiful singing voice that she'd rarely been allowed to use in her parents' strict household, their shared love of reading that led to quiet evenings with Nick reading aloud from one of the few precious books they owned. And each night, they fell asleep in each other's arms, their physical relationship growing as naturally as their emotional bond. 3 months after their hasty wedding in Fort Davis, as autumn painted the landscape in gold and crimson, Zoe made a discovery that would change their lives once again. She had been feeling unusually tired for several days, with occasional bouts of nausea in the mornings. As a healer, she recognized the signs even before her monthly cycle failed to appear. She waited until evening to share the news, after they had finished supper and settled before the fireplace. Nick was carving a small wooden horse, his strong hands moving with surprising delicacy as he shaped the figure. Nick, she began, her heart fluttering with nervous excitement, I have something to tell you. He looked up, setting aside his carving. What is it? I'm going to have a baby, Zoe said, the words sending a thrill through her even as she spoke them. Sometime in late spring, I think. The carving knife clattered to the floor as Nick stared at her, momentarily speechless. Then, with a whoop of joy that startled poor Rusty from his slumber by the fire, Nick swept Zoe into his arms, spinning her around the small cabin. A baby, he exclaimed, his face alight with wonder. Our baby. His unreserved joy banished any lingering doubts Zoe might have harbored about the timing. Though their marriage had begun as a rescue, it had become a true union of hearts. Now, it would be blessed with new life. As Nick gently set her back on her feet, his expression grew more serious. "Are you happy about this, Zoe? It's so soon after everything you've been through." "I couldn't be happier," she assured him, placing his hand over her still flat abdomen. "Our family is beginning, Nick, the family we chose to create together." The following months brought changes to their homestead, as Nick worked tirelessly to prepare for the baby's arrival. He expanded the cabin, adding a proper nursery adjacent to their bedroom. He crafted a cradle from oak harvested from their own land, carving intricate designs of leaves and stars into the headboard. The community embraced the news of the upcoming arrival. Rebecca Morgan organized a gathering of local women who presented Zoe with handmade blankets, tiny clothes, and practical advice for the birth and beyond. Thomas Morgan, not to be outdone, arrived one day with a beautiful rocking chair that had belonged to his own mother, insisting it should be put to use in the Garrett home. As winter settled over the land, bringing shorter days and occasional snow flurries, Zoe's body changed with the advancing pregnancy. Nick watched these changes with a mixture of wonder and protective concern, insisting she rest more and allow him to take on additional household tasks. "I'm pregnant, not invalid," Zoe would protest, though she secretly cherished his attentiveness. "Humor me," Nick would reply with a smile. "It's my first time being an expectant father." Christmas brought a surprising letter delivered by a neighbor returning from Fort Davis. It was addressed to Mrs. Zoe Garrett in an unmistakably feminine hand that made Zoe's heart race her mother's handwriting. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and read, "My dearest Zoe, I pray this letter finds you well. It has taken me months to find the courage to write, and longer still to discover where you had settled. Your father remains unyielding in his anger, but I cannot maintain such hardness of heart toward my only child. News reached us of your marriage and your new life." A traveling merchant who passed through Presidio spoke of a skilled healer named Mrs. Garrett near the Davis Mountains, married to a respected rancher. "I knew in my heart it must be you. I hope you can forgive my failure to protect you when you needed me most. Fear and a misplaced sense of duty silenced me when I should have spoken truth. Not a day passes that I don't regret my cowardice. If you are willing, I would very much like to correspond with you. Perhaps someday, circumstances might allow us to meet again. With love always." Your mother. Tears streamed down Zoe's face as she finished the letter. Nick, who had been watching her anxiously, moved to sit beside her on the sofa. "Bad news?" he asked gently. "No," Zoe replied, wiping her eyes. "Not bad at all, it's from my mother. She's reached out wanting to reconcile." Nick's expression was cautious. "How do you feel about that?" Zoe considered the question carefully. "Relieved, hopeful. I've missed her despite everything, and now with the baby coming." She placed a protective hand over her rounded abdomen. "I'd like our child to know at least one grandparent." "Then you should write back," Nick encouraged. "Family connections are precious, even when they are complicated." Zoe leaned against his solid strength, grateful once again for his understanding nature. "What would you think of inviting her to visit after the baby is born? Not right away, but perhaps in the summer." "If that's what you want, then I'm all for it," Nick assured her. "This is your home, Zoe. You decide who's welcome here." The simple statement, acknowledging her authority and agency in their shared life, meant more to Zoe than Nick could possibly know. In her parents' home, and certainly in the life the Reverend had planned for her, such independence would have been unthinkable. Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers carpeting the land around their homestead. Zoe, now heavy with child, found herself increasingly confined to the cabin and immediate surroundings. Her healing practice had been temporarily reduced to only the most urgent cases that could come to her, as riding had become impossible in her condition. Nick hovered anxiously as her due date approached, arranging for Rebecca Morgan to stay with them for the birth and ensuring a neighbor was always available to ride for the doctor in Fort Davis if complications arose. "You're fussing worse than an old hen," Zoe teased him one evening as he rearranged the birthing supplies for the third time that week. "Can you blame me?" he replied, coming to sit beside her on the porch where she was enjoying the mild evening air. "You and this baby are my whole world, Zoe." She took his hand and placed it on her belly just in time to feel a strong kick. "Feel that. Our little one is strong just like their father. And stubborn like their mother," Nick added with a grin, earning a playful swat from Zoe. The baby arrived 2 days later, after a labor that lasted from sunset to sunrise. Rebecca Morgan proved an invaluable support, her calm presence reassuring both Zoe and Nick through the long hours. When the first cry finally pierced the dawn light, it was Nick who announced with wonder-filled voice, "It's a boy. We have a son, Zoe." Exhausted but elated, Zoe reached for the tiny, red-faced infant as Rebecca placed him in her arms. "Hello, little one," she whispered, counting fingers and toes with a healer's practiced eye and a new mother's awe. "Welcome to the world." Nick knelt beside the bed, his eyes suspiciously bright as he gazed at his son. "He's perfect," he breathed. "Absolutely perfect." "Samuel Thomas Garrett," Zoe said softly. "After my father and your friend who has been like a father to you." Nick looked up in surprise. "Are you sure about your father's name?" Zoe nodded. "Despite everything, he gave me life and raised me to be strong. And perhaps someday he'll meet his namesake and find his way back to us." The tenderness in Nick's expression as he leaned forward to kiss her forehead spoke volumes. "You are the most forgiving, generous-hearted woman I've ever known, Zoe Garrett. Our son is blessed to have you as his mother." Baby Samuel thrived under his parents' devoted care. Nick proved to be a natural father, as comfortable cradling his son and singing lullabies as he was roping cattle or mending fences. Zoe watched their bond develop with joy, seeing in Nick's gentle parenting the absolute antithesis of the controlling environment she had fled. When Samuel was 2 months old, a letter arrived confirming that Martha Nelson would visit in late summer. The correspondence between mother and daughter had been cautious at first but gradually warmed as they rebuilt their relationship through written words. "She's coming alone," Zoe told Nick after reading the letter. "Father still refuses to acknowledge me." Nick's arm tightened around her shoulders. "His loss, but I'm glad your mother has found her courage." Martha Nelson arrived on a sweltering August day, stepping down from the stagecoach in Fort Davis with visible trepidation. Zoe, who had insisted on meeting her despite Nick's concerns about the heat, felt a complex surge of emotions at the sight of her mother, thinner and grayer than she remembered, with new lines of worry etched around her eyes. For a moment, both women stood frozen, the gulf of past hurts and separation seeming unbridgeable. Then Martha took a hesitant step forward, her arms opening slightly in question. Zoe didn't hesitate. With baby Samuel cradled securely in one arm, she stepped into her mother's embrace, breathing in the familiar scent that instantly transported her back to childhood. "I've missed you so much," Martha whispered, tears streaming down her face as she held her daughter. Then, drawing back slightly to look at her grandson for the first time, her expression transformed with wonder. "Oh, Zoe, he's beautiful. Would you like to hold him?" Zoe offered, carefully transferring the baby to her mother's eager arms. Martha gazed down at her grandson, gently tracing his tiny features with a trembling finger. "He has your eyes," she observed softly. "Those same curious eyes that used to watch everything so intently when you were small." The ride back to the homestead gave mother and daughter time to begin bridging the gap between them. Martha asked thoughtful questions about Zoe's life, listening with genuine interest to stories of the healing practice she had established and the community that had embraced her. "You seem happy," Martha observed as the Garrett homestead came into view, Nick's tall figure visible waiting for them in the yard. "Truly happy." "I am, Mother," Zoe confirmed. "Happier than I ever thought possible." Nick welcomed his mother-in-law with the same quiet courtesy he showed everyone, helping her down from the wagon and carrying her trunk into the guest room he had prepared. Over supper, Martha watched the easy partnership between her daughter and son-in-law with growing approval. "You have a beautiful home here," she commented as they sat on the porch after the meal, Samuel sleeping contentedly in his grandmother's arms. "And a fine husband." "Yes," Zoe agreed, exchanging a warm glance with Nick. "I found exactly what I needed, even though I didn't know I was looking for it." Later that night, after Martha had retired to the guest room and Samuel was settled in his cradle, Nick and Zoe stood together by the bedroom window, looking out at the star-filled sky. "Your mother seems to be coming around," Nick observed quietly. "She is," Zoe agreed. "I think seeing how happy we are together has helped her understand why I had to leave." "Do you ever regret it?" Nick asked, a rare note of vulnerability in his voice. "Leaving your family, your home. Taking such a risk with a man you barely knew." Zoe turned in his arms, reaching up to trace the beloved contours of his face. "Not for a single moment," she answered truthfully. "That day when you appeared at my window and said choose me instead, you weren't just offering escape. You were offering freedom, respect, partnership, everything I never knew I wanted until I found it with you." Nick's arms tightened around her waist. "When I saw what the Reverend tried to do to you, something in me just snapped. I couldn't bear the thought of you trapped in that life. But I never imagined we'd come to this, a real marriage, a son, a future together." "The best kind of unexpected journey," Zoe murmured, rising on tiptoe to brush her lips against his. "And it's only just beginning." As their kiss deepened, baby Samuel stirred briefly in his cradle before settling back to sleep, secure in the knowledge, even in his infant understanding, that he was surrounded by love. Outside, the vast Texas sky spread its canopy of stars over the Garrett homestead, where a family born of courage and unexpected choices continued to grow and flourish in the fertile soil of mutual respect and deepening love. In the years that followed, the Garrett ranch prospered alongside its owners. Nick's careful management and hard work expanded their herd to over 100 head of quality cattle, while Zoe's reputation as a skilled healer spread throughout the region. Martha Nelson eventually reconciled with her husband sufficiently to convince him to visit his grandchildren, for by then, young Samuel had been joined by a sister, Martha Rose, and later by another brother, James. The Reverend eventually left Presidio after his reputation was tarnished by similar accusations from another young woman whose family believed her account. The last Zoe heard, he had moved east to start fresh in a new congregation, hopefully a wiser and more humble man. But such distant news held little importance in the full, rich life Zoe and Nick had created together. Their days were filled with the honest work of ranching, the joys and challenges of raising their growing family, and the deep satisfaction of a partnership founded on mutual respect and genuine love. Each night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of the home they had built, Zoe would often reflect on the desperate young woman who had once fired her father's revolver in self-defense, setting in motion a chain of events that led to this unexpected happiness. "What are you thinking about?" Nick would sometimes ask, sensing her thoughtful mood. "About choices," Zoe would reply, nestling closer into his embrace, "and how the courage to make the right one, even when it seems impossible, can change everything." And Nick would always pull her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead before whispering, "I'm glad you chose me." "Always," Zoe would answer. "I will always choose you."